He was mad because I didn't answer him about what we were doing.
We're live. Okay, welcome back. Panel with 5 folks doing mutual aid work, everything for everyone, everywhere. I'll turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves and their work. Thank you.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for joining. I'm Ash. I'm going to be leading the conversation a little bit. As our introducer mentioned, this is everything for everyone, everywhere. Our goal here is to provide a bit of like a practical guide to mutual aid. So the topics we're going to discuss, I'm going to answer kind of the ambiguous question of what is mutual aid. And try to talk a little bit about the challenges in defining and establishing a structure for mutual aid. The next comment is going to discuss food sourcing and resourcing and distribution. After that, we'll discuss a little bit about community building and safety in mutual aid spaces. And then mutual education, which is political education, which is an important aspect of mutual aid. As we cover those topics, we'll leave some time for some open discussion between the 5 of us. Okay, so I'll get started with what is mutual aid. Actually, I wanted to do this topic because I wanted to force myself to have an actual positive answer to this question. I feel like a lot of with a lot of anarchist concepts, mutual aid is often defined by what it is not. Mutual aid is not philanthropy, it's not individualism, it's not volunteerism, it's not hierarchical, it's not community service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what is it? So I wrote down a definition that I felt good about, and it's this. Mutual aid is a radical collective practice of community care born out of the reality that people have needs that need to be met now. They cannot wait for a mass movement or a toppling of institutional power. But we need to remain informed of, how institutional power and the existing political structures are causing the needs and oppressive conditions that our people are suffering from. It aims to address both the immediate material needs of the people and confront the conditions that create and perpetuate them. To me, mutual aid is an important and necessary complement to political and protest action. Protest and direct action is attempting to attack the root causes of oppression, but really does nothing for those suffering under its weight today. And mutual aid seeks to, address that gap, alleviate the suffering through direct resource redistribution in a way that challenges the notion that we actually need these oppressive government structures to provide for it. Personally, I don't believe that we're ever going to mutual aid or food distro ourselves into revolution. Like, we really do actually need political action as well. But mutual aid to me is an indispensable survival skill for both the ongoing and deepening capitalist crisis and any genuine protracted struggle against the state. And moreover, it's an essential propagandizing medium for awakening people to masses to their own power. So historically, mutual aid has been a part of both resistance movements and revolutionary movements throughout history. Examples like the Paris Commune, Black Panthers, Vietnam's extended war against American aggression. It is, of course, heavily inspired by, or I would say entirely appropriated from indigenous and pre-capitalist societies around the world. And much of the foundational theorizing and modern implementation has been propagated by anarchist thinkers. I'm reading Kropotkin's book, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, I believe that's the subtitle, right now, which I find really interesting. But there's also Dean Spade's book, also called Mutual Aid, which was published during COVID, which I think is like, a really helpful and approachable guide to getting started with mutual aid projects. Okay, so there are a few basic principles that I associate to mutual aid. The first is right in the name, mutuality. This is founded in the idea that collective support, of building collective support. So resisting the bifurcation between those who are seeking resources and those who are providing them, those who are privileged and those who are system impacted in our communities. That separation in and of itself feeds into a lot of savior complex mentalities, or even, counter-revolutionary tendencies of, things that are typically termed community service or volunteerism or nonprofits in general. It obstructs true community building and obscures the precariousness we all face under capitalism. The motivating sentiment shouldn't be, I'm here to work off my guilt for being involved in the capitalist machine or winning at the capitalist machine, but rather I help my neighbors because I know one day I too will need help. I'm invested in the structure because it supports my own survival and our survival as a collective. It is, I think, ideologically set up against institutional and centralized power. We are facing a world in which nonprofits have built up an entire bureaucracy of executives and power structures that establish themselves as a separate organizing structure within the neoliberal apparatus and separate from the community that they serve. Mutual aid groups are looking to redistribute all of the resources that they have and empower the community instead of trying to profit themselves up. Another principle that I think is very important is that they're community funded and supported. And again, I'll contrast this to the nonprofit world that we kind of stand in opposition to. Some describe this as nonprofits having been captured or co-opted by the ruling class. But I would actually argue that they were a psyop from the beginning. All these sort of nonprofits and charities date back to the 19th century of robber barons looking to sort of fend off the angry pitchfork-wielding masses who were coming for them. I think very recent events have sort of elucidated to us the way that the OxyContin billionaires and Purdue family have totally infiltrated the arts and culture nonprofits. That's something that was kind of widely discussed in the movement a few years ago. Movements in New York have opposed the MoMA board, which is stacked with weapons and mining profiteers. This whole pernicious tendency has been really laid bare by the top-end solidarity movement, in which principled activists at all kinds of nonprofits, universities, hospitals, publishers, advocacy groups have been ruthlessly retaliated against and run out for their stands on Palestine by Zionist board members and funders. Another principle that I stand very hard on is don't fuck with politicians and co-opters. Politicians are, every local politician has their own kind of budget that they try to build a little fiefdom with by meting out, crumbs to their preferred NGOs. And this feeds a form of cronyism at best or outright corruption or graft at worst. And getting mixed into that as a mutual aid group is just, absolutely antithetical to everything that we do. And even setting politicians aside, there are always sort of unsavory characters, many from the nonprofit industrial complex or others that are looking to co-opt this work for their own agendas. Many invest in the status quo will be looking to silence the opposing vision that is produced by mutual aid projects. Anti-hierarchical. Mutual aid groups are kind of definitionally anti-hierarchical. And I know anarchists can get, kind of up in arms about this and ideological at times, right? There's a quote that you hear often is, we can't recreate the oppressive structures that we're claiming to resist. I definitely think that's true, but I also think that in the context of capitalist and neoliberal nonprofit paradigm, there's a more immediate reason that we need to resist hierarchy, and that's because hierarchy makes us a lot more easy to co-opt, a lot more easy to infiltrate, a lot more easy to get sucked into, the nonprofit world order. Nonprofits have hoarded an immense amount of quantity of resources in our current system, and there will be constant pressure and temptation to try to integrate into that. There'll be grants that are offering you a stable funding source, or supplies from an NGO that happens to be funded by BlackRock, or food from a nonprofit that has big contracts with tech companies. Some kind of distributed decision-making and accountability is necessary to keep ourselves honest and committed to our principles. So with that, I'm going to kind of shift gears into structure. So structure, you know, as anarchists, structure is a real challenge for anarchists. I think we can all admit that. But there's a reason for this. There are valid dilemmas and tensions that make us, both as anarchists and as mutual aid practitioners, wary of structure or you know, critical of it. How do we acquire resources without collaborating with neoliberal systems? How do we build consistency and reliability and sustainability without hierarchy? How do we distribute our finite time and resources and resolve conflicts within the community? All of these things are things that are left with ambiguous, sort of open-ended problems without a clear hierarchical structure. So what I'll say about this is that there's no right answer. There's truly no right answer on how to organize mutual aid and how to structure it. In fact, the experimentation is part of the resilience of the practice. It needs to be flexible and adaptable to different communities, to different community members, different political orientations, and different modes of practices in order to solve the multiplicity of problems and needs that our communities face. So how do we get started? I would say one thing to think about is aligning with your group on, you know, what of these principles are important, what they mean to you, how you prioritize them, what kind of compromises you're willing to make, and what decision-making structures you want to use. And in doing that, I think it's essential to develop a foundational synthetic camaraderie with your comrades in your mutual aid project. You need to have a working understanding of each other's values and orientations and sensitivities in order to build sustainable projects. You know, in working through this tension, you have to get comfortable with disagreements and conflicts. It's not essential for the entire group to be completely ideologically aligned, to work together and, again, meet the needs that our community has. Understand that it's okay for conflict to lead to projects splitting up and forking. Despite, you know, the capitalist mantra about economies of scale, for mutual aid, the end goal is actually an unlimited number of small-scale projects on the neighborhood or even individual block scale, constantly evolving and, you know, struggling to meet the community's needs. I'm going to go through some kind of organizational principles, you know, and I'm not going to go super into detail into these, but these are just some things that there's a lot of discussion and material online that you can look up that I think will help get started. So one, which I said over and over again, non-hierarchical structure. As I discussed, this is really essential to challenge sort of the neoliberal model of charity, philanthropy, nonprofit that you know, mutual aid is in opposition to. Consensus-based decision making. This is, you know, the dominant mode of decision making that I've seen in functional mutual aid groups, and it can be pretty challenging. There's a tension to balance between keeping members engaged, invested, and you know, truly involved without having things be so decentralized that nothing can get done. Meeting facilitation. There are a lot of guides online on making sure that meetings are run in an equitable, participatory, and democratic way. And I think that's a really big part of, you know, of keeping projects running smoothly. And yeah, one more thing, coming up with sort of an approach to welcoming and incorporating new members is yeah, really important to keep your project sort of growing and evolving, and keep existing members from burning out. So I kind of talked a little loosely all over the place. Hopefully this is a helpful start and introduction. Like I said, a lot of these are ideas that, there's tons of discourse and conversation online about that you can look up and become familiar with. But again, not to harp on this point, but the idea is for you to change and modify these structures in ways that work for you and your community. The flexibility itself is an essential feature of everything that we're doing. All right, so with that, I think the next comrade is going to discuss how to acquire and distribute resources.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, 4 of you about that. That might be the gist. Thank you. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Joan. I'm going to be talking about the accessing and distribution of resources to your food. And this will bit about me. I'm affiliated. I don't work further with a group, but I have a lot of experience in the past working with like districts in Lower Manhattan specifically, which is how I've gotten connected to the comrades here. So I feel like with structure and everything that Josh just said, you can start thinking about like what you want to do logistically with your distro. And I'm going to start with like sourcing, and I kind of like broke it down to like food and then clothing and like other supplies and hygiene, but starting out with the sourcing. Food, I feel like something that you like want to consider before learning about how to source and starting that process is just like what you want to serve, what you want to provide as far as food. Like, I think that you should know the community you're in and your neighbors and know generally like the population, the culture, the food traditions that are honored in the area that you want to set up in. And also like just be knowledgeable of general like dietary restrictions and allergens, so that's really important to keep people safe. Like you can't obviously accommodate everyone all the time, but I think this is just really essential when you're starting out to just like keep that in mind to try and honor like what people want in your neighborhood. So yeah, you like as far as food, I'd probably be doing something like large format, so like you would be serving and like there's like catering trays. So like keep that in mind of like what your capacity is. Like you might take inventory of like what you like to make, but also considering like doing that in a larger format is a little different. So like any kind of like little starches, grains, legumes goes a really, really long way when you're serving at a distro. And that can be like very filling and nutritious. So yeah, I feel like those are just questions that you should ask yourself as you start to look for potential ways to get the actual like, foods and ingredients that you need to like prepare your food. So yeah, for sourcing, I think having active and like working relationships in the community is super essential because you need to, like ideally, I think for me at least, it's ideal to not have to buy everything all the time and keep that fundraising push because it can be quite strenuous over time to like keep those funds going and coming up. So if you can like rescue the food, if you can partner with a grocery store, a farmer's market, restaurants, anywhere where you can get free supplies and food, that's really, really cool. So I also understand that that's not always possible as well, and sometimes you just need to put out a weekly fundraising post, like do, just be really on top of that and like buy your ingredients beforehand so that you have everything you need to like make your food before the distro and be ready to serve it. So also I feel like something that comes up is like dumpster is absolutely a thing as well. But I feel very strongly if you are going to distribute produce and or anything that you get from actually dumping and going into the trash, like maybe tell people where that's coming from. I think it's important to like have informed consent over that because not everybody would want to accept things that are coming from the trash, but in that okay. But yeah, just keeping like in mind people's agency and choice because you want to be, I think, in my opinion, like transparent and where things are coming from. But yeah, so I think overall, like, if you can sustain partnerships and like create a working group of like who you know already, like what kinds of relationships you have with local businesses or whoever in the community, take inventory of that and then map that out, and then also go from there and see what potential partners you could garner. I think it can be very difficult. I've seen it in the past where there's a lot of like bureaucratic processes that you have to go through in order to get those kinds of that supply going and consistent. So I just want to say right now that takes time and patience, and you may have to start doing a fundraising push to get things going and started. But in the long term, I would highly encourage trying to go through like you and getting like this started. Otherwise, it started like materials from businesses so that you can kind of sustain it long term. So yeah, I think that's all I had for the food sourcing. And this, like, that's not like the only thing that you can do at a distro. You can also give out clothing and like hygiene supplies, and I can touch just a little bit on that. I think it's a little bit more straightforward when it comes to like those kinds of like non-perishable items. With clothing, like I feel the community can always like come by and drop off like clothing, for example. I think it's like you have to make an ask specifically, like if you need like more mask clothes or femme clothes, or like consider like the season. You don't want to like accept, maybe depending on your storage capacity, you don't maybe want to take all the clothes that people like drop off, because then you're stuck with things that maybe you can't get rid of, which it just depends on the situation. But yeah, so for clothing, I think, and feel free to like weigh in if anyone else has any other ideas about like clothing hygiene items. But yeah, doing like donation drives is just making an ask to the community to bring what they can, take what you need to the distro. I think is a really good place to start. And that goes for like hygiene items too. You can always do like a donation drive and have people drop off things that they might not need or have sources to get from. And with the hygiene items, like travel size, anything travel size, like shampoo, deodorant, lip balms are super helpful, especially as the weather like gets colder. Like that can be even more important and essential. If anything, you can also order them bulk, like online, if you have the funds. Something that I've seen people do as well is like gather like hotel groceries like over time and just doing that as well. But yeah, as far as like clothing and hygiene, it feels to me that that is an app that you can put out into the community and hope that you could fit that it comes back around. And it's supplement it with like ordering it online. Yeah, and buying. But as far as that, I think that's all I have for like.
I was just gonna add a couple things on toiletries. Yeah, like hotel size, like travel size stuff is really good for unhoused neighbors because it's easier for them to support around. And there are a lot of sites that you can order that stuff in bulk. You can do small fundraisers and get a big stash. On clothing, not to discourage anyone from doing it, but I think people often underestimate the amount of work that it ends up being sorting through and figuring out what's useful and what's not. So just factor that in. And yeah, to the extent that you can put out specific calls that are relevant to your community, that'll sort of cut down on the amount of sorting that you have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you don't have to feel pressure to do all of these things at once, especially if you're just starting out. Maybe like focus on like just food or focus on just clothing or whatever, because it is like a lot. It is super, I feel like, strenuous to like go through, like you said, a lot of clothing donations, so there's like a lot of physical space, and yeah, it takes more time. So it's something that you can also consider just working towards and building through as you get comfortable doing this job. But yeah, that was it for sourcing, and I can move on to distribution. Some things, I think I should start with, I guess, location. Where do you want to set up? Where do you want to distribute? Location, especially, I can speak, I guess, for NYC specifically. I don't know. I think this is an international broadcast, so the laws, the legality is really, really gonna be different from place to place. So I'm gonna speak on New York City because that is what I know. So here, yeah, absolutely.
We have like less of a time constraint, so don't feel like rushed.
Okay.
And also, if anybody wants to add on like any of these topics that maybe someone forgot to ask to bring up, feel free. We have less of a time constraint.
Okay.
2 hours now.
2 hours? Oh, okay.
We don't have to make 2 hours.
Okay, sick.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So for location here, somewhere that is like very visible and accessible to like some like people that are just around. So like a park is always an option. Here in New York City, I feel like as long as you set up somewhere that doesn't like actively block like a totally block like a sidewalk or foot traffic, like you're okay. There's also like the question of like so-called publicly owned and privately owned spaces. As far as like law enforcement goes, I feel that if you do decide to set up somewhere that's maybe privately owned, the owner could like have more of a pull, I guess, over like cop intervention. So just like, I'm not going to tell anybody where to set up and where to not really. Like, you do what you feel is absolutely like necessary and then just like set up the distro, but make that choice with like a safety plan in mind. Be prepared for like any kind of like agitation or cop intervention, and just like have that, to be prepared for that and like have people ready to like confront it and work through those difficulties. Yeah, like scout the area, hang out there, like hang out for a while, for like a couple hours, and see like who is in the area and who like, yeah, they like who can pull up. So I think, yeah, that's it. If you have, oh yeah, so like when you're actually, once you choose your location, and let's just say that you want to do your food, you want to do hygiene products, you want to do clothing, for example. Something that's really helpful is just to put things out. If you have everything going at once, put things on separate tables so that people can spread out a little bit and the line doesn't like bottleneck too much. And that way also like people can, if they're only there for food, they can get in line and prioritize that. And if they want to grab something else, and they can go to like a different area, and I think that like really helps with the flow of your distro, and can prevent like, yeah, just crowds and agitation in general. Yeah, so I think the next thing you want to consider is just like material. This is just like a very basic starting off list of materials that you may want to have on hand. And especially, I think it depends on like your storage. But I think for food, you want like serving materials. So your, like I said, those like catering size dishes, your plates, something to serve on. You want like cutlery and takeout containers if you can. And for the setup, like have multiple like folding tables where you just like the things that you're going to distro is ideal. Banners are cool to like let people know who you are, who you're about, draw them in, do an art build with your comrades. And then like cleaning supplies is important. It's really essential to like clean up after the space like leading trace, like make sure that you're reflecting whatever area that you do your distro in. Yeah, and I think that just helps. It's conducive to just building like healthy relationships with the area and with the neighbors over time. And like something else to consider is like setting up some kind of transportation system if you have people who drive and have a car, especially in New York City. Like that's always really helpful to have. But like, you know, I think you can make it work especially if you're making it like hyper local. You could definitely make do with like transporting things with a cart or just carrying it in a big bag, whatever works. And some, and some like just kind of to do with structure is what you were saying, but I just want to like talk about those logistics and specifics, like having a list of roles that you think would be necessary, would help like the flow of things as well. So like having a sign-up sheet, for example, like knowing who is available on that specific day, can go a long way. So like you could have like a food, if you're doing this food rescue, like pick up, you could have people for that like pre-set up time, and then yeah, that's also your transport, I guess. And then you could have people that are cooking, and then you want another team for like serving and setting up at the actual space. And I think these roles can also overlap. It just depends, like, that this is just something that you might want to have just in case. And then, you know, once you serve and once you distribute, you will want people to, like, stay and clean and help pack up, transport everything, take it back to wherever it came from for your storage. And then, like, once you throw everything away, like, storage, like taking inventory and like knowing what's there, like having a role for someone to like make sure that you have everything you need maybe for like the next week, and if you don't, maybe someone needs to order something. Is where that kind of role would sometimes be. Hi Robert.
Hi Robert.
We're still wrapping up, almost done with my section, and then I think
Robert, if you want to add anything, we're talking about food distribution, food sourcing and food distribution.
Yeah.
So when this comrade is done with that part, if you want to add, and also like other resources, right?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about like clothing and I'm happy to like take some more time, especially if you have 2 more hours to expand on that. Totally fine. But yeah. That was pretty much all I had. I just want to like, I wanted to reiterate like what Ash was saying.
Okay, at least you have.
Yeah, like just be, you know, take what you learned, take what you heard today, and also be creative and adaptable. And like, don't be afraid to like change over time, because you are going to try things and it's not going to work, and you're going to have to like evolve, and that's okay, and that is just like what happens with this kind of thing. But yeah, every distro, every setting, every community is different. So yeah, it's just what I say may not always be applicable to other situations, especially if we're coming from like all over the world. But yeah, it's a learning process, doing a distro, and I think it just requires like patience and trust, and it's just something that's really exciting and really, really, really worth doing. Yeah, that's it.
So, thank you so much, Conrad.
Thank you.
So the next Conrad is going to talk about community building.
Yeah. Hi. Okay. I really, really hate public speaking, but I'm going to do it anyway. So yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about community building. Like at its most basicness, it's just talking to people and saying hi and getting to know them and listening to them and hearing about their problems and thinking about how you can contribute to, you know, finding other solutions for them. But like to go a little bit deeper and like think on more of a personal level, I saw this quote on the Woke Scientist Instagram that said communal bonds create collective endurance, and that really spoke to me. I thought about before I got involved in mutual aid, like 10 years ago, I was like super depressed, and I was doing the thing that like a lot of New Yorkers do, just like walking down the street, like blinders on, like not really making connections or ties to the community, like not really feeling like I fit in, like where I was going to work and such. And fast forward to thinking about that difference now, I mean, it took branching out and getting out of that comfort zone and talking to people and making those connections intentionally. But building trust, like showing up, getting to learn from people, helps to build those bonds. Having, sharing a meal together. Traditional nonprofit charities, they're going to give someone food, but they're not necessarily going to sit down and eat with them. So when you're in a distro space and you're all eating the same thing, you're waiting online just like they are, it builds that trust where you can then start to talk and get to know people. And it's really just like getting to know people in your everyday life, and kind of seeing that their struggle, their problems are interconnected to yours, and not like going back to that thinking of like being with your blinders on, like seeing things as, instead of just hearing somebody say they're struggling with something, thinking about like what resources or knowledge do you have that can help them, and then that also comes back to you. Not handling your problems like alone and individually, and it's not handling problems, but also like sharing in joy, like through the problems, is also super important. So I'm with a few different groups downtown. They all kind of develop organically, but most of them I wouldn't say are by people who live right there in the neighborhood. And so it's important when you're kind of coming into a park or a corner to really talk and invest in the people who are there and listen to them and let them kind of like lead the way on what's going on in that neighborhood, or in that specific space, and don't think like this is where the difference of like charity versus mutual aid comes in. Listening to the impacted people, but still like having the resources that you have that can contribute. Anyway, really though, like I've seen that, I see where the benefit of doing this on your street really is, like in your neighborhood, talking to your neighbors, both house and unhoused, like when we're talking about how do you find food sources, like that's also community building. That's also connecting with the local businesses or organizations, and connecting to help share resources. And, it is harder when, if somebody has to travel a half an hour to get somewhere, it's going to be harder to keep up in an organic way. Going back to the beginning, what I was saying about mutual aid is kind of integrating it into your life. It's not volunteerism. It's not you go in, you do a task, you clock out. It's every day. It's people have problems at 2 o'clock in the morning and call you and they need help right then and there. It's not just saying, oh, well, I just signed up for my shift at 2 p.m. Like, I'm sorry, I can't deal with this now. It's all the time. And so like having a community like right where you live is very helpful in sustaining whatever project or building that community when you can just, respond to whatever issue that's coming up and be there very quickly for someone.
I also want to say community doesn't just have to be on the ground. There's a lot of people who have maybe disabilities and they can't be in person, but this can still be built virtually. You can have meetings and connect with people on social media. You can connect with people, and we have a lot of people in all the groups that I'm involved with who maybe do stuff more remote and are still able to share and connect and contribute. It doesn't always have to just be in person. But yeah, when I think about like the people that have sustained each of the projects that I'm with, like it really comes down to those bonds that were made, like when you're organizing your supplies at like 10 p.m. and you're really tired and you just want to go home. Or we did a community movie with one of my groups last week, and just sharing in that everybody can connect to that experience of watching together or sharing a meal, and that consistent showing up for one another is what builds the trust and the foundation of your group. Does anybody have anything else they want to add to building community? I think it's just really, and not over promising things to people. Like when you go, like I see a lot of people come into things and they want to be so helpful and they want to be all over the place and doing all the things, but like really be clear about what your capacity is and what can you offer, whether that's like you're meeting someone, a neighbor on the street, or whether that's in your mutual aid group. It's so much better to like consistently follow through with a smaller amount of things than to say you're going to do like 20 things or tell a homeless person, yeah, you're going to get them, a computer, you're going to raise money for a computer, and then it falls through. Like, really be clear about what you can offer and what your capacity is, because people have had lots of experiences with others not coming through for them, and you don't want to be like another person doing that, and that kind of degrades the trust if you keep saying, I'm going to do this, and not able to do it. And also, I think Ash talked earlier about conflict. Like, when you're engaging in community, when you're engaging with people, period, conflict is going to come up. People are not going to agree on everything, and like that's okay. I see groups fall apart over conflict, over not being willing to like engage in that all the way through. It can be messy. Feelings are going to come up like that. If you're looking for just like, I see a lot of people come into groups who are not really willing to go through that, and they still have that volunteer mindset of, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do my task, I'm going to leave, everything's kind of already like set out for me. But like, that's not really community building. That's not really being engaged with one another. And if we just discard people, and it just keeps, if every time we disagree with someone, we discard people, we're going to be left alone, and it's not going to make the world any better. So I think that's really important. So working through the conflict, even if it's messy or if it's slower than we want it to be. Community to me is just really knowing that another person has your back and is going to stick through. And that doesn't mean that you don't ever hold somebody accountable, but just that like you're willing to be engaged and you're willing to keep learning and talking and listening to one another, and allow for the reciprocity of not just you're giving, you're also going to receive from others and let them be there for you as well. Anybody else want to add anything?
You know, thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, building community is a big part of what makes mutual aid, and so it's a very important aspect to think about. And yeah, I like the way that you framed it in terms of you know, building that connectivity with the people that you're serving and the people who are interested. The next topic is
yeah, if you are like, if you are making those connections and you are like putting in that effort, it's harder to disengage. It's harder to just like
That's what I, yeah.
yeah.
So it's not volunteerism. It's
Yeah.
you are invested
Yeah.
and you feel like you have this connection that you have to maintain, and that's what like we want for all of us. You know, like
Yeah.
you know, we want
That's what makes it resilient. It
Yeah.
makes it,
Yeah, exactly.
consistent and reliable and all these other things. Feeling a sense of accountability
and that's for like the folks who show up as we're the organizers, and that's for the folks who show up as we're here because we rely on this space. But when you have this sort of like connecting, that those lines disappear. You know, when you have those lines where people showing up for each other, those lines of like where you are in the position of that space disappear. It just becomes like an actual community.
Yeah, and that's why I really, really hate the term volunteer, because like that's not what I'm doing. I don't clock out. It's just all the time. I have my set distro days, but there's all the things that we've seen to make sure that there's food there to run an actual distro, but then there's also like the relationships that sometimes like somebody needs to move and they need help doing that, or somebody's having you know, a mental health crisis that needs to be responded to right away. That it's just life. It's not just tasks.
Right. Actually, I think we were misinformed. We don't have 2 hours.
our time just got cut again.
Yeah, we're on the same schedule. So
Okay, so how are we doing on time?
I think 6:20.
It's 6:06. So
Oh.
Next
we're
person,
going, yeah, we got 10 minutes. So yeah. So can we
So I'm gonna make this real
safety?
short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to scoot in or?
Oh, yeah, you like to switch.
I think I'm good.
Okay. You want to be up here?
That's fine. So I think like in a mutual aid space, obviously we don't want to. What are you doing? Obviously, we don't want to like recreate the world that we are rejecting. So we think of safety in a different way, and especially the folks that tend to seek out mutual aid spaces. Like these folks are like people who are very unsafe in everyday life. You know, disenfranchised, marginalized, targeted by the state. So like, what is defined as safety was defined by the people who are the safest in the world. The people that have power are the ones who tell us what's safe. So they'll say that like an unhoused man who is like asking for aid is unsafe, but not that this person needs to ask aid because they're starving to death. That's not like considered unsafe. That's just considered the way it is, you know, in this world we live in. So in a mutual aid space, we recognize that like what is safety is that we have like the things that we need to survive. We prioritize that, and you know, what makes people uncomfortable doesn't mean you're unsafe. Just because someone was going through so much and dealing with all kinds of stuff is expressing that's because they've never been heard. So we want to listen to that, and we want to address that, so that person feels safe. That person feels looked out for. Yeah, and there are like actual like safety things that can arise in a mutual aid space, because if you're you have to be an abolitionist space, otherwise you're not doing mutual aid. So like there conflicts are going to arise, and that's not something that we as abolitionists are going to seek out state aid, because actually it doesn't make anything better or safer. We are going to resolve that amongst ourselves, and there's always like sort of issues that we're still trying to figure out about like accountability, about forms of like justice and safety that don't replicate like what the state does. And I think like safety is more about in the space itself. The top can be an unsafe presence.
Cops are always an unsafe presence.
Yeah, but like definitely in a mutual aid space where there are people, a population that is like targeted by the state.
Right, even more.
And, yeah, even more so. And they tend to like get attention, like the state tends to give attention to these spaces because they realize that okay, there's unhoused people there. There's other folks that like maybe the neighbors are going to be calling 311 on. So like we want to make sure that like the cops do not sort of come to harass or threaten our community, and they really don't have a lot of power, like stopping us from what we do, because we're not doing anything that they could like cite as like illegality, like in illegality. Like we're not selling food. Everything that's there is something we're giving away, so they can't, when they first see you in a space, they may say, "Oh, are you selling food?" And then they find out we're not. They may have like, a noise complaint. So I guess you got to be careful with like the amplified sound, because we do have spaces where we like to have music as a part of it. The police do show up for noise complaints. But yeah, I think other than that, there's not really much they can do.
But you need to kind of feel it out for your neighborhood,
Yeah.
And outside of New York, obviously the laws are going to be different. Police response can vary widely.
Yeah.
And you may have to be prepared for more aggressive or more intense state violence, depending on where and how you're doing your job.
Yeah. So I think like I think we're more pressed for time now.
Yeah.
So does anybody want to add anything real quick on that before we move on?
I think we're good. Okay, so
Please,
All that stuff is on that side.
Robert, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you guys covered it all.
All right, so we're going to go on.
So our last summer is going to talk about political education, which, again, a really important part of mutual aid that is often unfortunately overlooked, but this summer has done a lot of work in rectifying that.
All right, cool. Yeah. Thank you everybody, and so thanks for having me. I'm with MASS, International Mutual Aid and Scientific Socialism. As the name suggests, we are a Marxist organization. We're not anarchists, but we appreciate the anarchists for having us. Scientific socialism, as opposed to utopian socialism, we're not just sitting around in a room talking about theory, trying to figure out who's imperialist and who's not. We're actually out in the street addressing the material conditions, trying to make a change in our neighborhood and trying to bring people together. There's a big debate among activists about whether or not, some people, they say mutual aid is the most revolutionary thing, the foundation of revolution, and some people say, it doesn't do anything and it's a waste of time. From our perspective, it's mostly 80% is just a nice thing to do. It's just something to do for your neighbors that's just kind and kind of baseline, something that you should do for other humans. But we also do believe that it could lead to other organizing. We've been focused on a lot of Ice Watch stuff, maybe tenant unions, just generally bringing people together. It leads to a lot of new opportunities for organizing. But we do say that mutual aid in and of itself is not a revolutionary act. We highly recommend this essay from the Tice Collective called Malcolm X Didn't Dish Out Free Bean Pies. I think it's almost an essential read for folks organizing mutual aid. So onto the poly ed stuff. We recently completed our political education program. We did an 8-week program, and we're building up our next one. We built it up doing outreach at our distribution for community members to join. We also have, sign-up lists and different group chats and stuff, namely for reporting Ice Watch sightings, but we could also link the educational programs through our email list and through our group chats and stuff. So we had pretty good turnouts. We started with, more simpler concepts such as surplus value, surplus labor, moving into dialectical materialism, and eventually we got into colonialism and more recent debates in the nature of imperialism and whether or not China is imperialist, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very interesting. As Marxists, we believe that education is integral to building revolution, from Lenin to Mao to Fred Hampton, et cetera, et cetera. We always taught that it could be no revolution without revolutionary theory and scientific materialist analysis. But we also say that political education is also important to combat ideological grip that imperialism holds on everybody. We know that we all have certain ideas and biases that we may not even be conscious of that's imbued in us as a product of the system. So we think that political education is useful to study and to push us to break down these thought patterns. So, although we do believe that material conditions are primary, and that's what we really focus on, we cannot discard the superstructural ideological conditioning. So we use political education to combat ideological myths and beliefs, as well as to sharpen our revolutionary consciousness and to organize more effectively. We kind of do it in two parts. We have our outward-facing one, which we have an educational committee that's focused on organizing this 8-week program and future studies. And then we also host internal studies with, very dedicated comrades and organizations in the neighborhood. Kind of we use as a way to also bring different organizations together. We recently did 10 weeks on Lenin's imperialism, and we will do, other books shortly. But, we think that as much as action is the foundation of movements, without no theory, we might just be going in circles forever. So we think that study is very important. I wrote down a couple points also to add on to what other folks were saying. In terms of the clothing drive, I think it's a good point. I just wanted to add on that we very explicitly asked people that are walking past the distro when we're letting them know, we did mutual aid, boom, 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 here's a little flyer, check this out. We tell them, one of the first things that we say is, if you have anything to donate to us that we could give out to the community, let us know, because people are sometimes hesitant to take things, especially if they're, relatively comfortable, they're okay in their life. They might think something like, I gotta leave it for somebody else. But if you tell them we're also taking donations, if you have extra clothes or if you want to cook for us, it makes it a lot more of a mutual exchange. And it's been very valuable in terms of bringing people together. And we have aunties on the bars that cooking frying fish for us now and stuff. But it's super beautiful, and I think it's definitely important to make people feel like they have a responsibility in keeping it going as well. I also agree very strongly that it's important to do the mutual aid as close as possible to where you live at, just in terms of meeting your neighbors. but it could also lead to so much other work, like I mentioned earlier, like tenant work, block associations, ice watch stuff, things of that nature. So I think the closer location you can find to where you actually live at, especially if you're the one hosting like the tables and the cooking and things of that nature, that would be super valuable. And yeah, I had some thoughts on hierarchy and stuff too, but I know we're running out of time and that might get into a whole nother argument, so we'll leave that one for now.
How are we on time?
5 minutes maybe open.
Robert, you got anything you want to add or jump in on?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, I think the thing that really separates mutual aid from charity is the political education component. And oftentimes it's very hard to kind of do that praxis because as you get into the work, you kind of get caught up in the nitty gritty and the logistics of it all, and you kind of forget to integrate that. But I think especially doing mutual aid around food, it's a great opportunity to integrate those things. Like, I think even for Marxists, they understand that if you want to understand how capitalism works and how commodities work, the basic starting point is food in a community. And the fact that there is, these scrappy groups of people able to feed such a bigger group of people points to one of the problems with capitalism, which is this general overproduction of commodities to try to make profits, which is why there's so much food produced and not able to be sold, made a profit from. So then it ends up in the hands of us to ensure it doesn't get thrown in a dump.
Your mic went off. Robert, your mic went off.
That was me. I stopped talking, so I turned my.
Oh, okay. Wrap it up.
Does anybody have any closing thoughts? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think just I do believe that mutual aid can be revolutionary. I do feel about it. I do feel that you need a structure in place for revolution. You need a system separate for people to depend on each other for food and safety, care, separate from the one that we have, so we can sustain a revolution. And I think that's what mutual aid should grow into. That structure, that underlying structure for revolution, and that could start in the neighborhood. The neighborhood could be a base of power. Every single neighborhood could be its own base of power. That might be a little anarchist, but
But to get to what you put on the flyer, it can be a base of power in opposition to the local police precinct, right? That is sort of the thing that you're setting up. I think that
every neighborhood is occupied by police precinct.
Yeah, we are under occupation.
Every neighborhood is occupied a police precinct, and there's ways that neighborhoods could counter that, could negate that, is by building their own internal systems of care and safety. So then the police is obsolete. The police do not get called because the neighborhoods have those systems in place that they develop, which is like mutual aid. Mutual aid is not just about eating together. It's about also looking out for each other, love fighting together too. So yeah, I think
Also, just don't let all the logistics intimidate you. You can just start just do the shit. Yeah, it's really not that hard. You see people
with the table. And...
Yeah, you don't even need a table. Go out with a bag of sandwiches and water, and say hi to people and introduce, or just cigarettes. Go around with a pack of cigarettes and just use that to talk to people and grow from there. If you try to, which I try to do, but if you try to do everything perfectly, you'll never do shit. But if you just do it, just say hi, just talk to people, just get to know people, and just let it grow from there.
Oh, one last thing. I guess this is for mutual aid organizers. We really need to bring in folks who are coming to us to rely on our space, bring them into the organizing, so they could bring back to like their block, and we can support that. We can support that. We can help develop that. We can use the resources that we have access to open up that access to like the folks who can do this on their own block.
I think that's a great point to end on. Thanks both for joining us. Hope that this was, helpful discussion, elaboration, theory, practicalities of doing mutual aid, why you should do it, and, so you can get out there and do it all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. No, they do. Thank you. Thank you.